And for our final story, for this edition of the Rolling Stone Gang, it's going to seem kind of odd, because we're not even talking about an event or a reaction to an event. We're talking about the reaction to an event. Earlier this week, Pete Buttigieg, one-time mayor of South Bend, Indiana, one-time presidential candidate, and now the transportation secretary in the so-called Biden administration, a man whose only really mark on history has been to be the first openly gay man in position X, announced that he and his partner, Chasen, he's not a husband, so I refuse to honor him with that title, had become quote-unquote parents because they had adopted two twin babies, a boy and a girl. Apparently, the mother didn't want the babies, and she had them up for adoption when they were still in her womb. And so, Pete and Pete's partner, adopted them and announced it all on the usual social media platforms. Now, on the Twitter announcement, Lila Rose, who is the founder and president of Live Action News, the pro-life advocacy group, simply stated, where are their mothers? Which is a perfectly logical, reasonable question to ask. If these children, had a mother, and the mother didn't want them, why were they given to two gay guys instead of to an actual family, an actual home? This video is going to get so much hate, and I don't care. Lay it on me. So anyway, to that reaction to Buttigieg's announcement, Brad Polumbo, who I think we have talked about here before, he writes for the Washington Examiner, for the Federation of Economic Enterprise, various other outlets. Young, I think he's only 23, 24, also openly gay, called Lila Rose's reaction to the Buttigieg's announcement homophobic, because she was going to override, her basic principles, her basic pro-life principles, in order to live out her homophobic tendencies of thinking that two loving parents, as Polumbo puts it, was raising two kids was icky or somehow inferior. And he had a whole long list. I mean, you could tell that this guy, Polumbo, was practically frothing at the mouth. How dare Lila Rose even say something like that? Actually, honestly told her, shame on you for doing this. Now, there are so many things, to be said. I mean, first of all, think about the amount of space that is being covered, even in the past 6 years, gang. 7 years ago, you would have expected prominent conservatives to actually say exactly what Lila Rose said. And now, in the blink of an eye, that is homophobic. With plenty of people supposedly on the right actually agreeing with that assessment that Lila Rose was being homophobic there. And Polumbo was trying to have his cake and eat it too, which we're going to see he try several times actually, by saying, well, if you're homophobic, that doesn't mean you're inherently evil, but it does mean that you're, this is a bad thing, okay? No. Again, you're splitting hairs, man, because you're trying to culturally shame Lila Rose for her perfectly normal reaction, but at the same time saying, well, I'm not trying to say that she's completely evil. Of course you think that she's completely evil. If you did not think that, you would not have said shame on you. You wouldn't have pulled her through the gauntlet of Twitter as you did. You would have just said, I think you're overreacting. You would not have said shame on you, as if she had just committed a sin, as if she had been, she had just been caught in adultery, like Hester Pym in The Scarlet Letter, or something like that. Now, Polumbo's whole thing, I'm getting to a major point here, gang, but I'm just setting the preliminaries here. There are two problems with Polumbo's little rant on Twitter, okay? And this is going to be important, so just stick with me, folks. The first thing is the cascade of misinformation that he actually wants you to assume. He makes the case that there are only two sides you can go on. You can either be pro-life, which means that you want kids to be adopted, whether they're by straight couples, whether they're by gay pairs, it doesn't matter. As long as they are quote-unquote loving, you shouldn't have a problem with it. Or, he said, if you do have a problem with it, like if Lila Rose has a problem with Pete and Pete's partner adopting these children, then you are actually helping abortion to survive. Because women will have unexpected, unwanted pregnancies, and there won't be enough people to adopt their babies. That's the assumption that he makes. And therefore, they will continue to go to abortions, which will then, of course, give abortionists and the abortion lobby through Planned Parenthood, etc., the legs to keep on standing and surviving in some form or another. So that's the dichotomy that Polumbo makes, and it is a false dichotomy, completely and utterly. And he either knows it and is lying about it, or he doesn't know it, which means that he has absolutely no business talking about these things because he hasn't done the slightest bit of research. 7 years ago, Robert Oscar Lopez, a former professor, he's been fired multiple times for asking questions that the narrative and the elites on both the left and the right don't like. Okay? Wrote a piece for The American Thinker. And this piece that Professor Lopez wrote 7 years ago was in response to when S.E. Cupp, who used to be on the right and is now a shrill over at CNN, came out for gay adoption, saying that it doesn't matter whether it's a mom and a dad or two moms or two dads, as long as children are being adopted by loving parents, quote unquote. That's important, okay? Keep that phrase in the front of your mind, loving parents, okay? We're going to come back to that. But as long as that was happening, no one should have any problems. And Professor Lopez in this piece, which I will link to down below because you need to read it, just went through all of the ways that that was wrong. For example, he said that between 12 and 15% of straight couples struggle with infertility, but instead of being guided to adopting children, they are actually pushed in the opposite direction, in the direction of in vitro fertilization. And one of the reasons for that is because the adoption system in the United States, like so many other institutions here, has become a racket. Adoptions now, adopting in general, is so expensive that gay pairs who on average have higher incomes than straight couples have outpriced straight couples out of the market. He also said, for example, that there is not a backlog of thousands and thousands of children who are unwanted, and the only people who would actually give them loving homes are gay pairs. He said, no, most of these children, are not even children. They're teenagers who are still in the foster care system for one reason or another. It's not because nobody wants them. Okay, they might have troubled childhoods. It could be any number of things. But this idea that 4, 5, and 6-year-olds are in the foster care system because there's no one there to care for them except the gay pair and the mean Christian fundamentalist bigots aren't letting them adopt them into, and being raised in a loving 2-parent home. It's a fantasy. Doesn't exist. He went further, and he actually said, again, Professor Lopez said, that many children who have gone through the foster care system, adults who were foster children themselves, want the foster care system to be, they want it to be reformed because of the corruption in it. Which is not what actually the gay lobby wants, because they are actually feeding from the corruption. They are benefiting from the corruption. Okay? So just on the practicalities of the matter, the dichotomy that Polumbo presented in his tweet rant was an out-and-out lie, whether he knew it or not. But now, let us dive into the really important part here. And it hinges on this idea that children need, a loving two-parent home. All right? The word parent is another victim of our complete disdain for words. Words are no longer anchors in reality. Words instead are simply empty bottles that anyone can pour whatever definition he wants whenever he wants. Again, if you happen to have the mandate of heaven, which is dictated by the left. Okay? Parent, when it is actually a word, when it is actually rooted in reality, is a marker that signifies a progenerative bond between two people. Okay? You are only a parent if you have actually created the child to whom you are a parent. So in other words, a mother who gives birth to the child is obviously a parent. The father who impregnated the woman of the child is obviously a parent because it was from their progenerative act, all right, making the beast with two backs, as it were, that a child has been created. That is what parent means. And what's interesting about that is that we can see this because if an unfortunate event happens and the child or the children of a man and a woman all die, then the man and the woman are no longer parents, are they? They're no longer parents because they have no more children. They used to be parents. They are former parents. But they are no longer parents. Have you ever had your mom or your dad tell you, well, we're always going to be your parents? Yes. Provided that you and your siblings all, outlive them. If you and your siblings all die, your parents would no longer be parents because they have no children to actually parent. So there it is. The word depends on the actual generative act of producing children, and then it actually depends on the continued existence of the parents and the children. And we actually we acknowledged this in other ways, okay? We would clarify the word. Step-parent, foster parent. They're fulfilling the role of a parent, but they're not actually your parent. Because, of course, if it was just all interchangeable, then you wouldn't have step-parent, foster parent. Those words never would have even been invented. Okay. So we have that. It can only exist then between a man and a woman, right? Because only them coming together can actually make a baby. That is just biology. And Polumbo can scream and rant at that fact all day long. It's not going to change it. So when you say that children don't need a mom and a dad, they just need loving two-parent homes, and there is no clarifying what that means, okay? It could mean a man and a woman, it could mean two men, it could mean two women, then the assumption behind that is that men and women are completely interchangeable, right? They're as interchangeable as Lego bricks. Men and women are not separate essences with their own weaknesses, flaws, ends, etc. We are just amorphous blobs of cells that can be mixed and matched and exchanged and everything else. Now, what does that mean? Because that leads us to something very interesting, very terrifying as well, gang. If you will remember your Aristotle, all right? We're going to do a little philosophy here. I know it's Monday, and we've just come off from a new week of work, the first day of a new week of work, but we'll go light here. Aristotle says that man is a social animal. That we, me, Nate on the Stone, in order to fully be human, needs the company of other humans. In fact, Aristotle says that a man who does not need the companionship and the society of other men is either a god, he's above humanity, or he's an animal, he's below humanity, but he's not part of humanity itself. Okay, so we're social animals. Now, what is really critical and fascinating is that Edward Fesser, who is an Aristotelian Thomist philosopher who is still alive, teaches in California. He has made the case, which is brilliant because it's so obvious, that this social aspect of our nature is completely dependent on the sexual bifurcation of our race. In other words, our sociability only happens because we are divided between men and women. So our sexual desire, a man's sexual desire for a woman's sexual desire for a man, is what causes us to break free of ourselves, to come together, right? In the first place. Now, what that means, to channel little Jordan Peterson here, means that in order to be attractive, in order to sate that sexual desire, would mean that we have to become attractive to the opposite sex, which means then that we have to learn the customs, the mores, and the traditions of our civilization. We have to learn social graces such as wit and charm. We need to probably work on our posture. We need to work on our physique, which would mean maybe exercising in a gym or someplace. We also need to know how to articulate ourselves. So we need to read books. We need to have discussion with friends so we can hone our verbal skills and all this. In other words, we need to be sociable in order to actually satisfy that sexual desire so that we can actually be attractive to the opposite sex. We need to be sociable so that we can be attractive to the opposite sex so that we can actually sate that sexual desire. And then, of course, when you add children into the mix, that just deepens those social bounds already, because now different pairs of men and women having children, they're not just pairs of men and women anymore. They are actually family units. And family units coming together, what do they need? Well, they start making neighborhoods. They start working together. Some will be raising, in a pre-industrial society, some will be raising animals for food. Some will be growing food. Maybe some will be blacksmiths or coppersmiths or metalsmiths or, tailors and cobblers. Some people will be working in factories. You need schools. Do you need laws to protect children and to protect their families, which then means that you need a police force and or a military force of some form to actually enforce those laws. You're going to need, as more and more families come about, you're going to need some sort of government apparatus to keep the peace, because families can't just get together now and discuss things. There are too many of them. In other words, civilization happens, which is exactly what Aristotle says. He says the family is the foundation of civil society, because it's families coming together and working together and just exponentially, naturally growing that makes the state, in his word, the polis, necessary. But what happens when this is reversed? What happens when this is reversed, gang, and when men and women are just interchangeable blobs of cells? Well, then the whole thing gets turned on its head. Instead of the family giving birth to the state, almost as a byproduct, now the state is the creator of the family. Here's a little thing that goes against the grain, but, why stop now? The LGBTQIA2+ whatever commune used to shriek in the pre-Obergefell world that marriage laws that define marriage between a man and a woman were bigoted, right? In reality, it was just the state recognizing what has been recognized since Eden, that children come from a man and a woman. In a post-Obergefell society, the power of creating families has been stolen from men and women, from nature itself, you might even say, and it has been given only to the government. Because now the government, the state, has the power to determine this is a family, that's not a family. Your parents, these are not parents. It didn't free marriage. Obergefell didn't free marriage or open up marriage or make marriage less bigoted. It simply gave the power of defining what a marriage and therefore what a family is to the state, which then means that the power is actually given to ideological demagogues who can whip people up into a frenzy and actually say that, well, this arrangement isn't recognized by law. It is an attack on people's civil rights, which is actually now what has happened, gang. The entire state of Utah has decriminalized polygamy. Several townships in Massachusetts have done the same thing. Did you even know that last month in August on Harvard University, an advocacy group, a legal advocacy group, was started on Harvard campus to advocate for polyamorous rights, quote unquote? You can't make this thing up. Yes, that actually exists at Harvard. I will link to the actual story from Harvard down below. You can get the story straight from the horse's mouth. And it's not even stopping at polygamy. There is currently a lawsuit in New York State where an unidentified father is suing to overturn the state's incest laws so that he can marry his adult child. We don't know if it's a daughter or if it's a son. And advocates are actually cheering him on, hoping for his success. These are the natural consequences of what happens when you start from the premise that men and women are not different, that they are completely interchangeable, that it doesn't matter if a child is raised by his father or his mother, or at the very least, a father and a mother figure. He can be raised by two women, two men and a baby, three men and a baby, four women and a man, four women and a genderqueer guy who flips and flops between feeling masculine and feminine depending on what day of the week it is. It doesn't matter, because all we are Lego bricks. And that is the story. That is the real reason why Polumbo's rant on Twitter was so informative, because it shows two things, I think. First, it shows that so many on the right don't want to actually follow the inevitable logic of their own positions, because if they actually did, and if they were actually honest about it, they would have a lot of explaining to do. And the second reason, which dovetails into the first, is that they don't want to do that because their own selfishness is more important to them than the welfare of families and their own civilization. And unfortunately, Polumbo isn't the only one on the right today who thinks that. So to paraphrase the words of Mark Stein, maybe before we take on the left, maybe what we need is a new and improved right that doesn't have the likes of Polumbo in it mucking up the works. Gang, I am going to leave it there for this week because I have talked for far too long as usual. Have a great week, gang. And I will see you again real soon. And in the meantime, defy the state. Defy the ruling elites by daring to read, think, speak, and write. I will chat at you all soon. Ciao.